So, first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to this first of the occasional winter talks. And we'd like to welcome Father Nicholas on a very interesting subject as we start to enter the month of November. There's obviously a lot of talk out there at the moment. Every house you go past has got pumpkins and Halloween figures and everything else. So we thought this would be a rather nice contrast to that, to explain a little bit about what Catholics think and believe about death and purgatory and ghosts, which is why it's really for grown-ups rather than children. So you've always had an interest in this, haven't you, Father Nicholas? As probably we all have, to be honest. It's the great last unknown, isn't it, to most people? So I think we're in for a very interesting talk. So that leaves me just to say welcome, everybody, and over to you, Father Nicholas.
Thank you very much, Angela, and once again, welcome to all of you. I'm sure we all have a sort of basic interest in this subject, don't we? A certain curiosity. And I personally don't have any big problem with Halloween, as long as it's not too over the top, as long as it's not glorifying the other side. But in a way, it kind of reminds us of the supernatural realities which we believe in our faith, the presence of things we don't fully understand, the spiritual world. And it's also a manifestation of the triumph ultimately of good over evil. So, you know, I don't have a big problem unless it's done in the wrong way and unless it's sort of too commercialized. But we're not really talking about Halloween today. We're talking about what Catholics believe about death, purgatory, and ghosts, which is something a lot of people often ask me about. As the cold nights draw in and the dead leaves cover the ground, our thoughts naturally turn to our own mortality, and also we remember those who've gone before us into eternity, including obviously many of our loved ones, perhaps our parents, our spouses, very good friends, grandparents, people we still very much miss and think about day by day. Now, death is a sensitive topic, and a lot of people are in essential denial about it today. We live in a world where we like to forget about the reality of death, although we see plenty of it on the TV and the movies and computer games. And this is in complete contrast to previous times when death was normally a natural part of life and very much present in the public consciousness. As I'm sure you might even remember, when someone died in the past, the curtains or shutters were closed. I remember my next door neighbor dying in about 1987, and you know the curtains were drawn for quite a long time after his death. Candles were lit. The house was often filled with family and friends and neighbors. In fact, in a small village, basically the whole community would probably pay their respects and go to that house. The priest, the minister would be there reciting prayers, and the church bell tolled. And then came all the funeral ceremonies and the period of mourning. Society, in other words, had its own way of dealing with the mystery of death. But today, it's really gone to the other extreme. Death tends to be anonymous. It's banished to the hospitals and the hospices. Not that many people are lucky enough to die at home. And you might only hear weeks later that a neighbor has died. Somebody lives just down the road from you. You wonder why you haven't seen them for some time, and you might find out much later that they've actually passed away. And even Christians sometimes put the emphasis very much on this world rather than life after death. Now, I think I was in my mid-20s when I first saw a dead body. And I know there are some people who don't have that experience until quite late in life. And the only reason I saw one was because I was a seminarian on placement at Northwick Park Hospital. As a priest, of course, I've been present with many people just before their death or just afterwards, and only once at the very moment of their passing. And of course, like many of you, I've had to deal with the deaths of my mum and dad. And I remember going into the room where my father had passed away just a few hours before, and I felt such a positive energy, a real tangible feeling of peace, which I remember really brought a tear to my eye. And the next morning that feeling had gone, but that evening it was very, very strongly there. And then the person who was with my mother when she passed away in hospital said that she opened her eyes for the first time in several days with a tear rolling down her cheek, and she looked upwards at someone or something. Death is not always like this, but often there are moments of very peaceful and almost beautiful transition, of slipping into another reality. And certainly sitting beside my mother during her last days, there was a real feeling that she had one foot in eternity, and that the veil between the two worlds was very thin indeed. Now, you don't have to be religious to believe in life after death. According to one recent survey, 18 to 34-year-olds are more likely to believe in it than any other age group, which is interesting. I think there is a natural yearning and a natural hope that there is more to this life than meets the eye, and that we will see our loved ones again. And perhaps the experience of COVID has meant that many families have had to confront the mystery of death and perhaps have an interest in these subjects. In a similar way, after the First World War, there was a huge upsurge of interest in life after death, and things like spiritualism and mediums became incredibly popular as people tried to deal with the trauma of loss. And perhaps there'll be a similar process after COVID in these years ahead. So what do Catholics believe about death? I think firstly, it's worth saying that there are two metaphors that we commonly use about death, which are very comforting, but slightly misleading when it comes to what we actually believe. The first one is something you hear quite a lot, that when somebody dies, they become an angel in heaven. We sometimes hear that, don't we? Heaven has gained another angel. And that's a beautiful poetic sentiment. But of course, from a more theological point of view, we remain ourselves. We remain human. We don't become something different. I am always going to be Nicholas Schofield in life and in death. Although, of course, we do hope that our loved ones are with the angels in heaven, rejoicing in the presence of God. The one similarity with the angels, of course, is that when we die, our souls are separated from our bodies. So we do become spirits in that sense. And I suppose we act and behave in a slightly different way to what we do right now. And we do believe also that at the end of time, our souls will be reunited with our bodies, so that we'll be, if you like, fully human again, body and soul. And we profess that belief every Sunday when we say the creed and we talk about the resurrection of the body. And the other metaphor that we sometimes hear, which is slightly misleading, is that when somebody dies, they are asleep. We often say that, oh, he's at peace now, he's sleeping, in the grave almost. Even when we bless the grave at the ceremony of burial, we say, may he or she sleep here in peace. That's not literally what we believe happens when we die. We don't believe in soul slumber. We don't believe that we just sort of go asleep until the last judgment or until the last trumpet sounds. In fact, the faithful departed are fully alive in Christ. And indeed, they are present to us still. They're not asleep. They're still very much alive. According to the Catholic understanding, when we die, we immediately come into the presence of our loving God. So people who have near-death experiences sort of have that experience, don't they? They often talk about going through this tunnel and feeling in the presence of immense love and seeing their loved ones again. I guess that's perhaps an expression of this belief that we come into the presence of God. And if you look at the Catechism, it refers to this moment as the particular judgment, which sounds a little bit off-putting, but we need to understand exactly what that means. In the letter to the Hebrews, we read that people die only once, and after that comes judgment. And Jesus told the good thief that day he would be with him in paradise. So, our eternal destination is something that happens pretty immediately after death. People near death sometimes speak of seeing their whole lives flash past them. And perhaps that's what this particular judgment involves, kind of just seeing our whole life as a totality, And then, please God, he says to us, come, enter my kingdom. You're now at peace. Come and join the angels and the saints. Souls that are perfectly pure and are ready are admitted to heaven, to what we call the beatific vision. Of course, there's always that option that those who have decisively separated themselves from God send themselves to hell, because in a way, heaven would be no place for them. They have made that choice through selfishness, through obstinacy, through whatever, to turn their back on God. And then we believe as Catholics that there's also a third state. You've got heaven and hell, and then there's this third state, which we call purgatory, which is a state of purification. So let's just look at that in a bit more detail. By the way, I should have said that there's no PowerPoint for this talk, because I've got no photos of heaven or purgatory or even ghosts. So I thought it's better you just kind of, sorry about this, just looked at me instead. So purgatory, it's often misunderstood. And of course, historically, it's fairly controversial. In fact, the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century was partly a reaction to purgatory. One historian has argued that Catholicism at the end of the Middle Ages was in a large part a cult of the living in the service of the dead. They were really preoccupied with the afterlife and praying for the dead and purgatory. And in some ways, that's not surprising, because life was fairly short. You know, you were lucky to get to your 40s and beyond in the Middle Ages. Death was always around the corner. People had just had this huge trauma of the Black Death, which was, you know, COVID to the power of, 15. A huge proportion of Europe's population had died. So death was very much on people's minds. And many churches in England up and down the country were either rebuilt or extended, partly as a reflection of all the new wealth that was around in the country, but also partly a reflection of this preoccupation with praying for the dead. If you have bigger churches with more chapels, then there's more space to have masses for the dead. And rich benefactors would make these foundations, knowing that prayers would be said for their families for many, many centuries. Now, to the Protestant reformers and also to some Catholics, this all smacked of superstition and also a sense of buying your salvation. A kind of rich nobleman, perhaps not living a very good life, but he builds a big church because he knows that prayers will be said for him after his death, and perhaps that will pay for his salvation. That's kind of the criticism that was made by some of the reformers. So what does the church actually say about purgatory? I guess you could summarize it in 4 short points. Firstly, that purgatory is real. Secondly, that the souls in purgatory are in a state of grace, that it's a kind of happy place. They're going to heaven, but there's this process of purification first. And that the purgatory is a place of transformation. And finally, that we can assist them through our prayers and our masses. So there's this link between the living and the dead. Now, critics say that purgatory was an invention of the Middle Ages, that purgatory doesn't appear anywhere in the scripture, and certainly the word purgatory doesn't appear anywhere in the Bible, just like other familiar words that we use, like Trinity or incarnation. And in fact, the word purgatory only dates from about the 12th century. But belief in this purification process after death goes back to the very beginning of the church. And it's also based on several passages in the Bible, such as in the book of Maccabees, it is holy and wholesome to pray for the dead that they may be loosed from their sins. So making that point that prayers can help the dead in some way. And also in Apocalypse, we read, nothing unclean shall enter heaven. In other words, there might be a need for some sort of purification before we get there. And there's also a certain logic to purgatory. And you can see this in an exchange between that great 18th century man of letters, Dr. Samuel Johnson, and his biographer, James Boswell in 1769. Boswell said, "What do you think, sir, of purgatory as believed by the Roman Catholics?" And Dr. Johnson said, "Why, sir, it is a very harmless doctrine. They are of the opinion that much of mankind are neither so obstinately wicked as to deserve everlasting punishment, nor so good to immediately merit being admitted into the society of blessed spirits in heaven, and therefore that God is graciously pleased to allow a middle state where they may be purified. You see, sir, there is nothing unreasonable in this." That's what Dr. Johnson, who wasn't a Catholic, had to say about it. So purgatory is a sort of middle state. It's not an alternative to heaven and hell. It's very much part of the process of journeying to heaven. And if you're basically good, but you need some sort of preparation or transformation, we go through this process before fully entering into the joys of heaven. I suppose in a way you could compare it to what we're doing in church at the moment. We come to Mass whenever we can, and we enter the church, and the first thing that happens is our hands are sanitized. We get a bit of a squirt of sanitizer on our hands to kind of for our protection and to cleanse us, and then we come into the church itself. And perhaps in a way purgatory is a bit like that. C.S. Lewis, another famous author, and again not a Catholic, he wrote, "Our souls demand purgatory, don't they? Would it not break the heart of God? Would it not break our hearts if God said to us, 'It is true, my son or daughter, that your breath smells and your rags drip with mud and slime, but we are charitable here, and no one will upbraid you with these things, nor draw away from you. So come, enter into heaven.' Should we not reply, 'With submission, sir, and if there is no objection, I'd rather be cleaned first'?" So purgatory is a very positive belief, and it's a happy place. It's almost, if you like, an ante-room, a kind of reception room to heaven. Now, what's a bit confusing is sometimes people talk about the souls in purgatory as the poor souls, or even the suffering souls. And sometimes you see images of purgatory and everyone is in fire. And something that Pope Benedict said is that fire symbolizes the love of God. It's like gold burning in the furnace. It's the fire of transformation, of cleansing. It's not something that's kind of meant to be nasty and painful, but it's something that is preparing us like gold in the furnace for the joys of heaven. Sometimes when we think of purgatory, we think of it in terms of time. And occasionally you hear people joke, "Oh, such and such an experience will take a few years off purgatory for me." And indeed, some of us perhaps feel that, we spend some of our purgatory on earth. The twists and turns of life can indeed strengthen us and purify us and bring us closer to the Lord. It's worth saying, though, that purgatory is outside time. It's a state of being, a condition. It's beyond time and place. Time only exists in this world. It doesn't belong to eternity. I think what might help us think of purgatory is a passage of St. Paul in the first letter to the Corinthians, where he says about death, "We shall not fall asleep, but we will all be changed in an instant, in the blink of an eye, at the last trumpet." I like that phrase, in the blink of an eye, in an instant. That's probably closer to what purgatory is really like, because there's no time in the afterlife. We shouldn't think of purgatory in terms of, I'm going to be there for 10 years, then I'll go to heaven. It's probably more like a blink of the eye, an eternal moment as we come into the loving presence of God. But as we come into the loving presence of God after death, there's some sort of purification. One of the really positive things about purgatory is it reminds us of our essential solidarity with each other, a solidarity which does not end with death. That death so often seems to be the ultimate barrier, but love is stronger than death, as Scripture says. And the Catechism says, from the beginning, the Church has honoured the memory of the dead and offered prayers in suffrage for them, above all, the Mass, the Eucharistic sacrifice, so that they may all attain the beatific vision of God. The church also commends almsgiving, indulgences, and works of penance undertaken on behalf of the dead. So there's that. I think it's a really positive thing, because sometimes when somebody dies, we feel such utter loss, and we feel that apart from remembering them in the past tense, there's no way of really connecting with them anymore. But the church actually encourages us to continue that relationship that we had with them in life by actively praying for them and assisting them. And we can be sure also that they're doing it in reverse, that in ways we don't fully understand, they're assisting us and helping us. That link of love and solidarity and communication still exists even after death. Now, this tradition of offering masses for the dead, which is something we do almost on a daily basis here, almost every mass is offered for an intention, and often it's for a holy soul, for someone who's died. It partly goes back to the book of Maccabees in the Old Testament. Judas Maccabeus had his soldiers send money to Jerusalem to offer up sacrifices for the soldiers who had been killed in battle. So there was a belief that those sacrifices were making a difference to the journey that we make after death. When St. Monica, the mother of St. Augustine, lay on her deathbed at Ostia, she asked her son, Augustine, "Bury my body wherever you please. Let that not be your concern. Only one thing I beg of you, at the Lord's altar, wherever you may be, remember me." So saying prayers for the dead, remembering the dead, having masses for the dead is a really beautiful act of piety and an act of solidarity for those who've died. But we shouldn't be superstitious about it, and we shouldn't be mathematical about it, like perhaps some of our medieval forebears. Asking a priest to say mass for great Aunt Nellie every week is not necessarily going to accelerate her progress through purgatory at the expense of those who don't have masses said for them. We can't sort of say, well, if I say 10 masses for that person and 20 masses for that person, it's going to work in this way. We offer masses, we offer prayers, knowing that they are acts of love and solidarity, knowing that none of these gestures are going to be wasted, but we leave it to God to actually work out how it all happens. And if we pray for somebody who no longer needs our prayers, then no prayer is ever wasted. Perhaps they help somebody in greater need. The main thing is that we remember the dead and we pray for them. Now, we come on to the subject of ghosts, which I suspect a lot of you are really, that's probably the main reason you joined the talk today. So I'm going to have a sip of water first, and we'll come on to this fascinating subject. We all love a good ghost story, don't we? As the shadows lengthen and the shops fill up with Halloween merchandise, I certainly like to dust off a book of ghost stories. And there's actually something quite reassuring and comforting about the whole thing. I don't know if you've seen in the papers, but one of the curators in the British Museum, Irving Finkel, is just about to publish a new book, which is called The First Ghosts, Most Ancient of Legacies. And he's been studying tablets from Mesopotamia. So that's kind of the Middle East, kind of Iraq, Iran, around there. He's found these tablets which are 5,000 years old, and lots of them contain ghost stories or prayers for the dead or spells to kind of get rid of ghosts. And he argues that down the ages, most human beings through history have believed in ghosts. And he says it actually goes back to the very beginnings of human civilization, along with our belief in God. He said in a recent interview, take as an example a Neanderthal burial in which the body is laid out in a prepared grave in a particular position alongside special bits and pieces. It implies that your expectation is that once the body decays, something, most likely the essence of the person, comes out of the body and goes on to some sort of afterlife. And if you're willing to accept this, that someone's spirit can disappear over there, it's a short step to believe that actually the spirit can come back again. I think, he says, we are hardwired to believe in ghosts. It's something very deep down, a human instinct to believe, to hope even, that ghosts exist. Perhaps some of us have had strange experiences ourselves. I have to say, I've never seen a ghost, but once since staying in a old cottage, which I think was kind of 15th century, so very, very old, I did hear some strange noises in the night, which didn't seem to have a natural explanation. It didn't seem to be old pipes or floorboards. And over the last few days, I've spoken to people who have experienced some sort of presence in their homes, not so much somebody rattling chains and wearing a white sheet, but it might be an unexplained smell, whether it's of cigarette smoke or flowers, perhaps even a shadowy figure that's sometimes seen. And there are many, many good Catholic ghost stories. There are accounts of priests returning from the dead because they've forgotten to say a particular mass for somebody, and they kind of try and make it known that mass should be said for this intention. Father William Lockhart, who founded St. Etheldreda's Ely Place, once saw a ghostly lady walking down the stairs of the presbytery holding a lit candle. A former parish priest is said to haunt Sacred Heart Church in Caterham, which is where my mum grew up. And there's a story of a priest at the London Oratory responding to a telephone call to visit a dying parishioner one night, except that no one knew who actually made that phone call. It certainly wasn't the family or anybody living in the house. It was always a mystery how that phone call was made. In the Westminster Archives, there's a letter which I found describing the experiences of a priest called Father Thomas Smith in 1893. One night he was reading in bed when the door opened, and to his astonishment, two recently deceased friends walked in, Father Moore and Father Murray. And Father Smith later stated that whenever he thought about it later, he felt really nervous, but at the time he was perfectly at ease because his two dead friends, in all their looks and actions, seemed as natural and easy as when he knew them in this life. But this was no courtesy call. Father Moore, one of the dead priests, began by telling his friend, "You're a nice sort of fellow to call yourself a special friend of mine, and yet you've only said one mass for me since I've died." Father Smith asked his surprised visitors whether they were happy, to which they replied, "Yes, we're perfectly happy, but we'd be much happier if you actually say a mass for us again." And then his visitors disappeared. Whether it was a dream or something based in reality, who knows, but it's an interesting instance of a Catholic ghost story. Now, the church has no official teaching about ghosts. It's certainly true that occasionally we find mention of ghosts in the Bible. In scripture, the apostles mistook the risen Lord for a ghost in Luke chapter 24, verse 37. So that implies that at the time of Jesus, people believed in ghosts, and the apostles kind of believed in ghosts and perhaps told each other ghost stories. They thought the risen Christ initially was a ghost. And the Old Testament contains the rather bizarre story of the witch of Endor, who summons up the recently deceased prophet Samuel at the request of King Saul. St. Augustine believed in ghosts. St. Gregory the Great included lots of ghost stories in one of his famous works, which was called the Dialogues. And St. Thomas Aquinas, one of our great theologians, he taught that souls don't normally leave the afterlife, but God occasionally permits a departed soul to appear, perhaps to give a message or a warning or to ask for prayers. But there's no formal church teaching about it. You could almost say the church is agnostic about ghosts. They might exist, they might not, we don't really know. But it does kind of fit into some of the other things the church believes in, and it also fits into our Catholic tradition, as we've just seen in all those stories. At the Reformation in the 16th century, ghosts were actually a subject of debate between Catholics and Protestants. Protestants were anti-ghosts, Catholics were pro-ghosts. For the Reformers, ghost stories were an example of the superstition and corruption of Catholicism. They just saw it as a way to raise money and to scare people into praying. Catholics, on the other hand, stressed the reality of ghosts, and one 16th century French Capuchin writer wrote that spirits have been seen and heard in every circumstance. Chiefly, they appear in places where in times past there have been horrid deeds, perhaps assassinations, riots, even on battlefields, and again on spots where foul midnight murder has been done, by lonely gallows, in woods, and not unseldom in churches and cloisters, near sepulchres and in graveyards, in prisons, old manor houses and castles, sometimes too in the shadow of stately palaces. So there was a real belief that the ghosts were real. And sometimes ghost stories had a more practical purpose. For some anti-Catholic writers, ghost stories could sometimes show the dark deeds of monks and clergy before the Reformation. You know, often there's some naughty priest who might be behind a ghost story, or even a nun who had been walled up alive for some awful crime she'd committed. In fact, if you go to Whitby Abbey, there's a legend that a walled up nun haunts the place. Of course, there's no evidence that this ever happened, but it kind of entered the popular imagination. On the other hand, ghost stories were very useful for Catholics who secretly met for masses at a time when mass was illegal. You know, mass often said at the dead of night or very early in the morning by priests who were hiding and using disguises. So it was actually rather useful to spread stories about ghosts. Ghosts might put off people from being too nosy and for investigating what was happening at that Catholic house down the road. And also ghost stories would explain all the strange noises and dark figures as they organize these secret masses. But what is certainly true is that ghosts survived the Reformation, and they're very much present in our psyche. In fact, I would say that this country, perhaps more than most, has a sort of national obsession for ghosts and hauntings. English ghost stories are often full of nostalgia for the past, aren't they? A ghost in a historic home is normally associated with some famous figure like Henry VIII or Anne Boleyn. Often it's linked to some tragedy or a victim of unrequited love. And sometimes there's a hint of regret at things that are no longer a past vision of England. It's funny, isn't it, that almost every ruined abbey seems to have ghostly monks and nuns. So perhaps it's a kind of sense of nostalgia and wanting to link to the past. We're fascinated by ghosts. We love our ghost tours and ghost hunter documentaries. But it's intriguing that if you go to Catholic countries overseas, you don't really see that same fascination. If you go to, say, Italy or Spain, perhaps it's changing now, but you know, you don't. There's no kind of ghost tour of Rome or books about haunted houses in Madrid. Perhaps people still have a lively belief in purgatory and actually praying for the dead rather than being titillated by stories about them. If you go to Rome and the little church of the Sacred Heart, just over the Tiber, there's actually a purgatory museum, the Museo del Purgatorio. It's tiny, it's in the sacristy, and it's basically only one case really, but it comprises a few exhibits that are supposed to encourage people to pray for the holy souls rather than to make it into anything too gimmicky. It's largely things like fingerprints burned into books and cloths and pieces of wood, which apparently were caused by ghostly visitors who were asking for prayers to be said. But that Museum of Purgatory in Rome is a bit of an exception. Normally in historically Catholic countries, there isn't that same fascination that we find in England. As I said, the church officially has no position on the existence of ghosts. And in fact, there's no set method of dealing with a haunted house. Perhaps once or twice a year, we get somebody phone up to ask for advice because they think there's a ghost in the house. And I don't have a book that has a particular ceremony for dealing with a haunted house. Normally what I do is I go round, if it's appropriate, and I just do a house blessing and make sure that I pray for any people who might have died in that place or had a link with that place. The vast majority of ghost stories, of course, probably have natural explanations. It might be an overactive imagination. It might be a time of stress and trauma. It might be something that's seen or heard when you're half asleep. It might be a dream. It might be strange noises at night, which actually have a natural explanation. It might even be related to mental health issues. And there are also suggestions that previous occupants of a house may leave behind them some sort of energy that we don't fully understand. It might be positive, it might be more negative, and that some people are able to pick up on this and be receptive to this energy, and that's when they have strange experiences. And it's especially the case perhaps if there's been a tragic event, a trauma, perhaps even a death in a particular place. And certainly we've all been to places which seem full of light and peace, which are very happy. So you think, yes, people have loved this place. This is a happy presence. And we've also been to houses which we're only too eager to leave. Perhaps there's some kind of oppression, darkness, whatever. We just know that something strange is happening there. It's not a happy place. And perhaps in these cases, there is some kind of interplay between the natural and the supernatural. Energies that we don't fully understand, possibly something linked also to the spirit world. Perhaps here I might mention a story from my early years as a priest. When I was in another parish, I was asked to go and bless a haunted house, and a lady had seen a dark hooded figure in her bedroom. And so I began to dutifully bless the flat, which was actually quite modern. And I was sprinkling holy water all over the place and kind of making up prayers as I was going along. And I spent a long time in the haunted bedroom, saying prayers there and saying a few Our Fathers. And then suddenly, as I was in the haunted bedroom, there was a huge bang. And the lady screamed. And I must say the hairs on the back of my neck also were standing up. And I thought, gosh, this is just like the movies I've seen. We weren't taught about this in seminary. What am I supposed to do? But we gingerly investigated once the shock was over. And at that very moment that I was blessing the haunted bedroom, somebody had put a telephone directory through the door and it made a big bang on the mat. So it just shows that sometimes there are natural explanations behind these things. So as Catholics, how do we approach the whole subject of ghosts? Well, you know, we don't have any firm teaching about whether they exist or not. But certainly the whole subject is it's not a laughing matter. It's not something to provide entertainment and titillation. And in a very rare instance of possibly coming to a genuine case of a haunting, our reaction should not be so much morbid curiosity, but solidarity with the faithful departed. And the most effective weapon of a ghostbuster is prayer. So if we think that there is some kind of haunting, we say a prayer about it and for the souls involved. And often that does make a difference. Now, when I was a child, I was fascinated by the afterlife and ghosts. And I must say Halloween was quite a big event, although in the 1980s it was so much smaller than it is today. I also had a great fascination with the London Underground. And one thing I actually did, and I hope people don't think I'm completely mad and will send me off for kind of therapy on this, but I used to devise maps of railways linking heaven, hell, and purgatory. So I imagine that the afterlife had a kind of network like the London Underground, and they had stations like Heaven Central, South Hell, and Purgatory Junction. And I love drawing carriages crammed full of angels and saints and demons. And actually the other day I went up to the attic here because the boiler wasn't working well. And I think I noticed a book from my childhood that possibly does contain some of those drawings, rather alarmingly. But this chimed in with something, a passage I found the other day written by Monsignor Ronald Knox, who was a famous English Catholic writer. And he kind of said, you shouldn't map out the afterlife too much. This is what he says. I wonder whether we don't make the mistake of mapping out the unseen world too confidently, dividing it up too much into watertight compartments, especially when you consider how little theology has to tell us about it. In fact, if you look at the Catechism of the Church, this subject's only a few pages, compared to this huge book. A lot of it is theological speculation. Monsignor Knox said, I mean, when one of our friends dies, we think of him or her in purgatory, but for how long? well, we go on praying for that person for the rest of our lives with a vague idea that our lives will be as long as it's purgatory. But if I suggested to you that we should all kneel down and say a Hail Mary for the soul of William the Conqueror, your reaction would be, William the Conqueror? I should think if he ever got to purgatory, he's out by now. Yes, but what do we know about it? We do map out the unseen world, the afterlife, perhaps a bit too confidently, using categories that we don't fully understand. We do speculate a lot. Some of these things are best left alone, and we should be careful, certainly not to be too curious or too morbid. There is so much we don't know, so much we don't fully understand. So let us rather be full of hope that the Lord has promised you and me eternal life, that, please God, we will be with him one day and will be reunited with our loved ones, and that in the meantime, we should live each day fully, doing God's work and living according to his grace. And all this discussion we've had tonight about remembering the dead and about whether ghosts exist reminds us that those who have gone before us don't simply disappear as if they had never existed. They're still very much part of our lives. They're still joined to the living and present to us in so many ways. And let me just read to you as a final thing, the famous quote from Bishop Brent about what is dying. He said, I am standing on the seashore. A ship sails in the morning breeze and starts for the ocean. She is an object of beauty, and I stand watching her till at last she fades on the horizon. And someone at my side says, she is gone. Gone. But where? Gone from my sight, but that is all. She is just as large in the masts and the hull and the spars as she was when I saw her, and just as able to bear her load of living freight to its destination. The diminished size and total loss of sight is in me, not in her. And just at the moment when someone at my side says, she is gone, there are others who are watching her coming, and other voices take up a glad shout on the other shore. There she comes. And that, my friends, is dying. Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon her. Them may they rest in peace. Amen.
Well, thank you very much, Father Nicholas. I think we give you a round of applause.